Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the October 2024 Council Agenda Briefing. We acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional custodians of this land, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and their elders past and present. I would like to advise everyone that the audio and video of this meeting is being live streamed to YouTube. I request everyone to please turn off your mobile phones. I remind you that audio recording of the meeting proceedings and photography within the chamber is prohibited unless prior approval has been granted, and councillors and city officers are reminded to disclose any declarations of financial interests and interests affecting impartiality and are requested to activate their microphones during the meeting. So, with that, welcome everyone. Item 1 is the declaration of opening, and I declare this meeting open at 1 minute past 6 p.m. Items for council. Agenda items 2, 3, 6, 7, 8.1, 8.2, 9, 11, 13 and 14 will be dealt with at the ordinary council meeting to be held 22 October 2024. Item 4 is attendance. Item 4.1 is apologies. I have received apologies from Councillor Hayley Prendeville and Councillor Andre Brendera-Brandis. Item 4.2 is approved leaves of absence, of which there is nil this evening. Item 5 is declarations of interest. Mayor Greg Milner, that's me, I've declared an impartiality interest in item 12.2 as I'm one of the elected members who has made a declaration that appears on the city's public disclosure of political party associations register, and I've also declared an impartiality interest in item 12.6 as the motion seeks to change the reporting requirements that I'm subject to. Councillors, does anyone else have any declarations? Councillor Coveney.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. An impartiality interest at 12.2. I'm also on the register. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Navard.
Thank you, Mayor Milner. 10.5.4, I have a proximity interest regarding City of South Perth Policy 106, use of city reserves and facilities. My proximity interest is in relation to Sir James Mitchell Park in the vicinity of the flagpole. My interests are impartial, as the family has been resident in the same dwelling across from Sir James Mitchell Park for 77 years, and we're completely accustomed to the location and busyness at times.
Thank you, Councillor Navard. Just to clarify, I may have misheard you. Did you say that your interest was so that you're impartial or proximity? Good, okay. Thank you. Councillor Waugh?
Thank you, Mayor Milner. Also impartiality interest in respect to item 12.2, as my name also appears on that register. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Councillor Cridland?
And my declaration or disclosure of interest is exactly the same as the preceding councillor and yourself, Mayor.
All right. Councillor Choi?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Yes, impartiality interest in 12.2, notice of motion, Councillor Nick Coveney, political register. I tabled and moved the request for a creation of a disclosure of political interest register and updating of the councillor code of conduct to include a requirement for elected members and election candidates to disclose their political party membership and employment status ahead of council endorsing it at the April 22 ordinary council meeting.
Thank you. Any further declarations of interest, councillors? No, okay. In that case, we'll move on to item 8, which is presentations. Item 8.3 is deputations. And this evening, we have 2 deputations. They'll each have 10 minutes to address council. And I'd like to begin by inviting Ms Louise Walker and Mr Kevin Pryor of South Perth, who are speaking against the officer recommendation at item 10.3.5. Welcome, Ms Walker and Mr Pryor. Please come to the microphone and well, the floor is yours.
So is this mic live? Yes.
It is, yes. Feel free whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Kevin Pryor was unable to get here. He's on a plane from Brisbane, unfortunately. So I'm just by myself. And I'd like to explain that I live in the ground floor unit, number 4 of 5 Clarence Street, South Perth. And I oppose the change of use for the unit above me, which has been a short stay facility for the last 12 years. In that period of time, I've seen that short-term visitors do not have the same sense of responsibility to the community which we used to have in this complex. Also, the owners of the short-term accommodation complex are largely not showing much interest in the complex maintenance backlog, considering the building was constructed in 1975. It's nearly 50 years old. We've got ongoing significant issues, big costs. The Strata Council was active. We were complimented on it about 5 or 6 years ago, but it's now dysfunctional. We have no office bearers this year and little or no activity. Our complex maintenance is suffering. And I believe that's a consequence of the business activities, the balance, the ratio of short-term owners who are largely distant from the day-to-day issues with the maintenance of the place compared with the people who live in the complex. I've been there for, I bought in 2010 and I've moved in 2011. I've been there for a while. I'm a Strata Council member and I see little interest with the fact that the complex is old. Maintenance is now a very expensive issue and ignoring it is not improving the situation. Negative impacts on me since 2012, which is when Unit 8 became a short stay facility, include a bizarre situation in 2012, which I did detail in my submission. The filming started after midnight. I was told it was filming by the police who attended at about 6:30 a.m. the next morning. It didn't stop until the police arrived. After the filming, a couple of days later, there was a lot of activity, again after midnight, in the street, moving stuff in and out of cars. Now, I didn't see that. I'm on the ground floor. It was a neighbour who was on a first floor unit who was watching this. She's a farmer's wife. Her kids were boarding at Aquinas, and she was watching this stuff. And she was too scared to make a phone call about it because she believed what she saw was really quite nasty. That was the 2012 exercise. The first few weeks that the place was an Airbnb, I couldn't even get out of my car. I had to park elsewhere because there was a massive big square van that made it really, really difficult. So I just parked elsewhere. We've got parking issues. There were escorts coming in at 1:30 a.m. A whole lot of activity upstairs. I couldn't sleep, and the most revolting cigarette smoke at about 5:30 in the morning the next morning. These things happen, you just put up with it. Noise, generally, there was usually, once or twice a month, there'll be international visitors coming off international flights. They'll be in the car park between midnight and 2 a.m. They're organising their family out of the car with all their luggage, finding their unit. I can understand that. But when you get a couple of them at the same time, you go back to sleep and then you're woken up again. I've moved out of my main bedroom, which is facing the car park, into another room, which is further away. It's not just at night. Parties, to tell you the truth, aren't a major issue. But there was a woman, she told me that she was in a relationship breakdown. But she was at it day and night. Other residents caught me in the car park. There was a group of us in the car park, and they were saying, how do you put up with it? I was like, just have to put up with it. She was very, very loud. She was distressed. The people who come in and out of short stay places are not settled. The kids are not settled. The adults are not settled. They don't have the normal boundaries and the normal disciplines of, a family or a community where they're responsible for their actions. Compromised children, one of them banging her heels on the ceiling above my bedroom, having moved. This would start about 10:30 at night, and she'd be demanding ice cream. It was summer and I could hear what the conversation was at night. It would go through till about midnight. Eventually, I went up there to find out what was happening because this child's language was foul. It was a 6-year-old. and God knows what experiences she'd had. She sounded like a rebellious teenager. It was absolutely foul. And there was another footy family came in. They had 5 a.m. starts. They didn't bother keeping the noise down. I called Strata and they said, well, go and knock on the door, explain your situation. My son was doing year 12. These people kindly donated some rotting fish to my air conditioner on their way out. As I mentioned, parking, it's difficult. The car parks are narrow. There's no guest parking in the complex. And frequently visitors and tradesmen park outside the marked bays and sometimes on the verge lawns. Sometimes I have to actually go and find who's parking me in because it's a trade van. But it's not just trade, it's also short stay visitors with their minivans, loading and offloading and just trying to get out for work and stuff. Large work vehicles, just a few weeks ago, there was a 1-tonne truck, an Avis van, that was there for 3 weeks. The guys were nice, they moved over. But if you can't catch them, you can't ask for some, a bit of help with that. Large 4-wheel drives all make it difficult for me to open my car door. I'm in a very narrow car parking bay. And it also makes it difficult for me to get into the bay because I've got to swing my car in. It means a whole lot of backwards and forwards, if I can even do that. For the large vehicles on the other side of the car parking, I own a small car, but I've been photographed, and the photograph provided to the last AGM in November of my car tyre about this far over the line. I'd swung out wide because the lady next to me is the mother of some small kids. I was giving her a bit more room to get out of a car. So I don't have a copy of the photograph even though I asked for it. 2 owner-occupiers in the complex moved out and sold their unit, and a third moved out and is now renting the unit because of incidents they believe were caused by short-term holiday tenants, theft from outside a unit of expensive sports shoes, also another unit, what sort of didn't really make their day was theft of an expensive briefcase and laptop. Another owner, his wife parked in the car park next to a short-term stay bay, and panel on her car, new Volvo, was damaged. Somebody swung a car door into it. There's no sense of community responsibility. They don't care. They're only there for, a few days in a week. They don't answer to anybody. They do what they want. I believe that owner-occupiers and short-stay arrangements are not a comfortable mix. They can be workable if there's a sense of responsibility and community. My back door is only a few steps from the stairs to the units above. I'm on the ground floor. Access to those units is up those stairs. Seriously, 4 steps and you're in my door. All the short-term visitors pass with easy access into my home. So I've got to keep my security arrangements locked all the time. I lock my back door if I go and get my washing off the lines. I lock my gate at night. The gate is a visual barrier against this compromised child who, this is a different compromised child, who on the way out one morning kicked my screen door, and I was on the other side of that door also heading out. It sounded like a gunshot. It really scared me. I had no idea what was happening. The people who were doing the filming in 2012 were involved in some fairly dubious activities, all after midnight. They came and knocked on my door and I was absolutely petrified.
60 seconds remaining.
Okay. We've had a lot of security issues. The short-term visitors don't add value to the property. Airbnbs run day and night. I've had maintenance issues with the unit above, and I'm now under a SAT application with regards my security arrangements, which I see is very intimidating, on top of the fact that I've still got moisture issues which are being monitored in the slab above me. The next lot of testing will be just before Christmas, just to validate the results I've had out of the last one. I want to repaint the ceilings after the flood in 2022. Does anybody know what 4.5 kilolitres of water looks like? I told the plumber, his jaw dropped. It's a huge amount of water. It was a waterfall, and it saturated the belongings in my storage area. Yeah, I've still got moisture problems. Yeah, I oppose this because I think maintenance and sense of responsibility and community is really missing in this instance.
That's 10 minutes. And thank you for your deputation, Ms Walker. Councillors, does anyone wish to ask Ms Walker any questions about her deputation? No. Thank you very much for your deputation.
Thank you.
I'd now like to invite Ms Joanne Ord of Como, who is speaking against the notice of motion recommendation at item 12.2. Welcome to you, Ms Ord. The microphone is yours. We look forward to your deputation.
Hi, everybody. So I'm speaking against this notice of motion tonight as I believe the political interest register provides an additional level of transparency and accountability for the community. But I do want to clarify that I'm not really interested in the reasons why councillors may choose to become a member of a political party, but I am interested in how councillors conduct themselves whilst that membership exists. And so it's important to remember why the original motion for the register was put forward by Councillor Choi in April 22. And item 1 of that motion reads, the state government is proposing a range of reforms to the system of local government in WA, and one of the reforms proposed is the replacement of the current first-past-the-post voting system with preferential voting for local government elections. If this proceeds, this will bring WA's local government voting system in line with state and federal systems and with other states. Local government elections in other states often experience political parties running candidates and handing out tickets on how to preference their votes during the campaign period. Preferential voting can therefore result in politicisation at the local government level and bring party politics into local government. In council establishing and making publicly available a register, we're ensuring an extra layer of transparency is present ahead of any government reform and election period. If the proposed reform doesn't proceed, the register will still serve to increase council's level of transparency and accountability to the community. Item 2 of that motion read, the community have an interest and right to know about their councillors' formal political affiliations and associated employment and how that may influence their decision-making, whether perceived or otherwise, on council. The city's commentary at that time is outlined as follows. The city has a number of publicly available registers that are applicable to elected members. There are at least 9 registers available on the city's website, from disclosures of interest through to contact with developers and lobbyists. And it should be noted that the state government at that point had not endorsed any reforms regarding elections, but in any event, a disclosure of political interest register can be developed and published if resolved by council. End of commentary. The city also provided a suggested alternative recommendation as the proposed register required an amendment to the Code of Conduct. And so in effect, the city provided information and then left the business of council decision-making to council. And these were some of the comments from councillors during consideration of that motion and the potential local government reforms. It improves transparency, avoids political influence in local decision-making. It's good governance. Declaring should encourage local members to act with local government in mind. One of the biggest festering messes in local government over East is the ability of developers to make contributions to candidates. The second festering mess is organised political parties gaining access to local government. Keeping party politics out of local government is a good thing. Party politics creates block voting. I'm hopeful that preferential voting does not come in. Preferential voting encourages deals. The focus should be on the priority of local government free from bias or persuasion. And that alternative motion was passed by 7 votes to 2, and in fact 5 of those 7 members are still on council, those being the Mayor and Councillors Navarre, Choi, Brenda, Brandis and D'Souza. So after Clause 10A came into effect, but prior to the 2023 local elections, those local government reforms involving preferential voting were introduced, unfortunately. And I certainly noticed that that election had a different tone to previous ones, and I'm hoping that isn't our new norm. And until that last election, the political interest register was relatively inactive, with only 1 of 9 declaring membership. Now we have 4 of 9 declaring membership. All the publicly available registers provide layers of transparency for the community. And when some of the registers are read in conjunction with each other and other publicly available information, they can be quite informative. But with regard to the motion before us to remove Clause A from the CCC, it concerns me that there is no mention of transparency and accountability at all. It seems focused on perception of the register rather than the intent of the register to provide transparency and accountability for the community. And so I put it to council that if councillors are acting at all times with the best interests of the community in the forefront of their minds, what's the problem with councillors having to declare a political interest? Councillor Coveney is of the view that Clause 10A needs improvement or should be abolished, but instead of suggesting any improvements, he has proposed the clause be abolished, which I find disappointing as a member of the community. I'm also intrigued by Councillor Coveney's assertion that he's convinced 99% of residents aren't interested in the political register. Councillor Coveney has been an elected member for 1 year. I compare that to statements made in April 22 by the previous Mill Point Ward councillor, Mr Manolis, during debate on this matter, and he had been on council for 6.5 years by that point. He stated that in his experience the community is interested in whether councillors are a member of a political party. I also recall the Mayor appeared on 6PR following that resolution, and he commented that when he's out and about in the community and when campaigning, the question of which political party do you belong to is amongst the top 10 questions that he's asked. He stated the community has an interest in that sort of thing and was happy to supply that information. And by that time, the Mayor had also served on council a similar period to Mr Manolis. I'm not really a fan of analogies as they can be interpretive and somewhat of a stretch. I prefer absolutes. But I suppose wanting to do away with the political register could be likened to someone saying, I don't like CCTV really. It's like being spied on. They might think I'm doing something wrong. But I take the view that if you're conducting yourself in an upstanding fashion, just going about your business, CCTV doesn't matter. It does come in handy if someone is doing something questionable. To authorities, it can be a valuable tool and increases accountability. And in my view, that is all this register seeks to do, increasing accountability and transparency for the community. The register is for the community's benefit and not for councillors to be concerned about perception. There was an opinion piece in WA Today a few years ago about the impending local government reforms, and in part it read, what is ironic is this local government review has 3 key themes: agile, smart and inclusive. Agile addresses resources and expenses, doing more with less and being smart with ratepayer funds. Inclusive is representing the whole community, and smart is about meeting community expectations and being transparent and accountable. So ring that bell, there's that big T word again, transparency. Ratepayers want to be able to make informed choices with all the available information, not cherry-picked or protected because there may be ways around accountability. They deserve to have confidence in the councillors. So if this reform really is agile, inclusive and smart, then those politically affiliated individuals should play their hand. End of extract. So I ask Council to consider, how does removing the political interest register support transparency and accountability, which featured in a key theme of the local government reforms and were key elements supported in the 2022 motion? It's of note that when Clause 10A of the CCC was introduced, the City assigned no applicable risk. Yet with this new motion seeking to abolish Clause 10A, the City has upgraded that risk. And this time around, the City appears to have taken a position on this motion. I wondered if the City ought not to have taken a position, but rather just provide current information as it did previously. But in any event, Council can still choose to keep Clause 10A and the political interest register, just as it chose to endorse it in 2022. And in doing so, the Council showed their commitment to the community's best interests. What message would Council send to the community?
60 seconds remaining, Ms Ord.
Sure. What message would Council send to the community if they now choose to abolish this register? Clause 10A should be retained for transparency and accountability purposes, and I encourage councillors not to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Ord. Councillors, do we have any questions for Ms Ord? Councillor Coveney.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you for your deputation. You'd mentioned, the Department of Local Government, Sport and Cultural Industries doesn't support the register. What do you say about that?
I think council's decision can be quite separate to that support. If they view that it's in the community's interest, they're well within their rights to endorse a motion such as that.
And my other question is, you'd mentioned that in the eastern states, political parties endorse candidates. Are you aware of any local government in WA that does that?
No, I'm not.
Thank you. And my third question is, do you think the community is also interested in the political donations paid by candidates to political parties, and also candidates or councillors that attend Labor or Liberal Party events or some other political party events?
Donations? No, I don't think. If you're a member, you have the ability to have input to policy, but making a donation, you don't.
Any further questions for Ms Ord, councillors? No. Thank you very much for your deputation.
Thank you.
Okay, that winds up item 8. We now move on to item 10, which is the draft October reports. And I'll now hand you over to the Chief Executive Officer, Mr Mike Bradford, to take us through the balance of the draft October reports.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.1.1, proposed lease of portion of Lot 3 on Plan 14563, City of South Perth Civic Centre for a telecommunications facility. This report recommends that Council consider advertising for the disposition of a portion of 59 Sandgate Street, South Perth by way of a lease.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, do we have any questions for the administration on this item this evening? Councillor Choi.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, I have submitted a number of questions online, but I think something came through this afternoon, but I haven't had a chance to look at that yet. So if the administration wouldn't mind just bearing with me and asking those questions here, but I won't ask all of them. So the first one was, what is the current market rent review rate for commercial leases, please?
Shall I send that to Ms Fry or to Mr Adams? Ms Fry?
Yeah, through the Chair, the market rental valuation assessment has considered comparative market evidence for the telecommunications facilities on similar sites and determined that the market rental rate between $55,000 and $60,000 per annum, including outgoings, excluding GST.
Thank you, Ms Fry. Councillor Choi?
Thanks through the Chair to Ms Fry. Can the independent market valuation of the premises please be made available for elected members' review on the Hub?
Ms Fry?
Yes, it can be.
Thank you, Ms Fry. Councillor Choi, another question?
Yes, thanks, Mr Mayor. Again, through the Chair to Ms Fry. Given that policy P609 states in relation to the management of commercial leases that they will be for a rental amount reflective of an independent market valuation of the premises, why does it appear, and why would it be in the community benefit for the City to negotiate a more favourable annual rent amount to Indara, which appears would have a continuing flow-on effect year on year throughout the life of the lease, including the revaluation years?
Ms Fry?
So the key terms that have been negotiated sent the commencement rent at $50,000. During the term, the City will have the ability to collect rates of approximately $5,000, which will increase rent by 3% annually, and then adjust the rent to align with the market every 5 years. This approach is in line with the current industry trend that seeks to navigate away from in-gross leases. And regarding community benefit, by providing ongoing tenure, the services currently being delivered by the telecommunications network are maintained. Should tenure not be provided, there is no guarantee the same level of service can be provided from another site.
Thank you, Ms Fry. Mr Bradford, anything to add to that?
I think if I've got it correct, then the market valuation was $55,000 to $60,000. The rent of $50,000 plus outgoings puts it right in that zone.
I guess it's also worth adding that the valuation is not an exact science either. So, I think we're pretty close to where that valuation mark's set. But, obviously when we get valuations, it's done on a scientific basis, I guess, the science behind it. But, it's not an exact science.
Thank you, Ms Fryer, Mr Bradford and Mr Adams. Councillor Choi? No further? Okay. Councillors, any further questions on this item? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.3.1, Scheme Amendment Number 1 to Local Planning Scheme Number 7, Short-Term Rental Accommodation Draft Planning Policy, Unhosted Short-Term Rental Accommodation Advertising, and Revocation of Policy 350.18, Short-Term Accommodation. The purpose of this report is for Council to consider Scheme Amendment Number 1 to Local Planning Scheme Number 7 to update the scheme text to introduce new and revised land use classes and general definitions to facilitate state government reforms for short-term rental accommodation, to consider revoking policy P350.18, short-term accommodation, and to adopt a new draft local planning policy, unhosted short-term rental accommodation, for the purpose of advertising.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, Councillor Coveney.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Does this short stay policy include any locational criteria?
Ms Mullen?
Thank you, through the chair. No, it doesn't include any locational criteria. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Coveney?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Can I ask why, given my reading of the parliamentary inquiry, was that they recommended locational criteria?
Ms Mullen?
Thank you, through the chair. Officers are not recommending locational criteria due to the scale and size of the district, and also because any locational criteria would ultimately, as you can see from the proposed scheme amendment, result in unhosted short-term rental accommodation being approvable within all areas within the district.
Thank you. Councillor Coveney?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you for your answers. Is this a template from the state government? I understood that we were waiting on some kind of template from some government agency before we, finalised ours.
Ms Mullen?
Thank you, through the chair. The city has followed a template that's been prepared by Walga in association with the DPLH. So yes, this is the template that the city was waiting for. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Mullen. Councillors, any further questions on this item? Councillor Navard.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, I was just wondering about the actual processes. If, for example, a property is reported by a resident as not addressing the conditions of the STRA tenancy agreement, how would the city address the complaint, please?
Ms Mullen?
Thank you, through the chair. So if development approval is granted for an unhosted STRA and the property is not being operated in accordance with the approved management plan, the city will investigate and undertake any compliance action as necessary.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms Mullen. Another question, Councillor Navard?
I do have one more, please.
Far away.
How would the 90-day limit for use of a property as short-term rental accommodation be monitored by the city, please?
Ms Mullen?
Thank you, through the chair. The city doesn't actually have a role in monitoring the 90-day limit for the use of a property as short-term rental accommodation. This is monitored via the STRA register, so it's administered by the Department of Energy, Mining, Industry, Regulation and Safety, and they will actually monitor the 90-day limit before development approval is required. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Mullen. Councillor Choi?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just following on from Councillor Navard's question in relation to compliance, what does that typically look like? Like how long would a resident have to wait for a potentially non-compliant STRA to be addressed?
Ms Mullen?
Thank you, through the chair. There's two elements to this. So if development approval has been granted and it's with an unhosted STRA and there are issues with regard to the management, the property being operated in accordance with the management plan, the city is very responsive to such complaints and will investigate straight away. If a property is being used as an unhosted STRA and there's no registration in place, that would be a matter for demurs, and there are fines in place that can be issued by the department. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Mullen. Councillor Choi?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and through the chair to Ms Mellon. So what are the implications if council, for whatever reason, decide not to endorse this item at this point, the officer recommendation at this time?
Ms Mullen?
Thank you, through the chair. So may I ask which part of the recommendation would council not be endorsing? Thank you.
Councillor Choi.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor, and thanks, Ms Mellon. Sorry about that. And especially, I'm thinking about the locational requirements as well as covered by Councillor Coveney, because I was expecting there might be something in there about location. I know we have discussed that previously. So if there are parts of it that councillors still want to look at improving, or we could discuss with officers about possible amendments, or is the template the kind of policy we should be following? Like, what are the implications if we sort of make any major amendments to it now?
Ms Mellon.
Thank you, through the chair. It is obviously open to councillors to make suggested changes to the policy because a policy is adopted by council. Officers have followed a template to prepare the policy, but there is obviously scope to consider amendments to that.
Thank you, Ms Mellon. Councillors, any further questions on this item? I guess maybe I'll ask one then, and it follows on a bit from what Councillor Choi had to say. If I've read this report correctly, the scheme amendment, at the very least, has been drafted by the state government, and the state government requires us to pass it within a reasonably limited time frame once you count back how many days everything's going to take. And I do understand that the corresponding local planning policy has been based on a WAUGA template. From a practical point of view, does council have much choice or discretion on this item, at least as far as the scheme amendment goes, or is that essentially a state government mandated fait accompli?
Thank you, through the chair. In short, no, the council doesn't have much choice or discretion. And yes, it is essentially a fait accompli. In accordance with the West Australian Planning Commission's Planning Bulletin 115 of 2024, the amendments to LPS 7 are mandatory by the 1st of January 2026, although amendments to be finalised preferably by mid-2025, and local governments should, in accordance with the bulletin, concurrently prepare or update their local planning policies.
Thank you. Any further questions, councillors? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.3.2, Canning Bridge Activity Centre Plan, extension to approval timeframe. The purpose of this report is to seek approval from Council to request the West Australian Planning Commission to approve an extension to the approved approval period for the Canning Bridge Activity Centre Plan.
As the Canning Bridge Activity Centre covers areas within both the City of South Perth and City of Melville, has the City consulted with the City of Melville as to the City's recommendation to obtain an extension of the Canning Bridge Activity Centre Plan approval timeframes from the WAPC? And if so, what was their response, please?
Ms Mellon.
Thank you, through the chair. Officers have consulted with the City of Melville, who are currently progressing an amendment to the Canning Bridge Activity Centre Plan for land within the City of Melville, which is anticipated to be finalised towards the end of 2024. It is understood an extension of time will also likely be sought as part of those amendments. And given the City of Melville is also likely to seek an extension of time, they have indicated no objection to the City's request.
Thank you, Ms Mellon. Councillor Coveney.
Just a question out of curiosity. What's the reason we're doing this now when the current the current plan expires on the 18th of April 2026?
Ms Mellon.
Thank you, through the chair. It's really good governance to prepare well in advance to seek an extension of time. A review of the Canning Bridge ACP it's a very significant amount of work that will need to be undertaken. And what we don't want to obviously do is reach a point where it is due to expire and we don't have a replacement document in place. So we're really just planning ahead to avoid that, the implications of running out of time.
Thank you, Ms Mellon. Councillor Choi.
Yes, thanks, Mr Mayor. Is the WAPC likely to grant the extension, and what are the implications if the request is not granted? Are there any potential consequences if the City cannot extend it past the 18th April 2026 timeframe?
Ms Mellon.
Thank you, through the chair. The City has been in discussions with the DPLH. It would be very unlikely for an extension not to be granted to the timeframe. And they have indicated that it will be progressed concurrently with the review of the Canning Bridge ACP currently being undertaken by the City of Melville. So, yes, it's likely the WAPC will grant that extension. If the request is not granted and it expires on the 18th of April, then there will actually be the land reverts back to the centre zone. Therefore, there's no permissible land uses over the area, and in essence, officers could consider any use within the Canning Bridge ACP.
Thank you, Ms Mullen. Councillors, any further questions on this item? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.3.3, proposed three-storey grouped dwelling, Lot 1, number 52A, Leonora Street, Como. The purpose of this report is to consider an application for development approval for a three-storey grouped dwelling on Lot 1, number 52A, Leonora Street, Como. The item is referred to Council as the proposed height falls outside the delegation to officers. For the reasons outlined in the report, it is recommended that the application be approved, subject to conditions.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, Councillor Choi.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And again, I submitted these couple of questions before the meeting, but again, I don't know if anything's come through this afternoon and I haven't been able to check prior to the meeting starting. So the first question was, the plans included in the attachments to the council agenda appear to show a three-storey single home with no common property. And I was just wondering how the DA meets the definition of a group dwelling within a strata lot.
Ms Mullen.
Thank you, through the Chair. And thank you for sending the questions through. The property is considered as a group dwelling as the lot contains two dwellings, one existing dwelling and one proposed. The definition of a group dwelling in accordance with the R codes is as follows. A dwelling that is one of a group of two or more dwellings on the same lot, such that no dwelling is placed wholly or partly vertically above or below another, except where special conditions of landscape or topography dictate otherwise, and includes a dwelling in a strata title scheme with common property. The property was originally a built strata, and this was formalised in 2019.
Thank you, Ms Mullen. Councillor Choi.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and through the Chair again to Ms Mullen. So I noticed that 52A Leonora, 52B, there's a 52B Leonora, which is at the back of 52A. And I think the residents of 52B have to cut across 52A to get to their mailbox because the address is on Leonora, even though that 52B property is actually situated on the laneway. I'm just wondering how, like in perpetuity, is the resident of 52B meant to get their mail?
Ms Mullen.
Thank you, through the Chair. So in relation to the provision of mail, this isn't actually a planning consideration, but the rear dwelling does currently appear to receive its mail from Leonora Street. This will need to be formalised and resolved between the owners in the future, but that would be a civil matter and not a planning consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Mullen. Councillors, Councillor Navard.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My question is relating to the referral to the 1% art contribution, should that be consistent with the build. And I was just wondering, it talked about the construction cost of the build and whether the construction cost includes the cost of the building interior fit out, or is it just this, like the superstructure? Thank you.
Ms Mullen.
Thank you, through the Chair. So this construction cost is based on the cost as identified when the building permit is submitted. So that would be the cost of constructing a completed dwelling.
Thank you, Ms Mullen. Councillors, any further questions on this item? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.3.4, proposed change of use, grouped dwelling to unhosted short-term rental accommodation, Lot 1, number 1 of 15 Angelo Street, South Perth. The purpose of this report is to consider an application for development approval for a change of use from a grouped dwelling to unhosted short-term rental accommodation on Lot 1, 1/15 Angelo Street, South Perth. The item is referred to Council as the proposed land use falls outside the delegation to officers. For the reasons outlined in this report, it is recommended the application be approved, subject to conditions.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillor Coveney.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Sorry if I missed it, but does the applicant have the approval of the Strata Council?
Ms Mullen.
Thank you, through the Chair. I would take that on notice. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Mullen. Councillor Choi.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm just confirming that there were no submissions received from the public consultation period for this application.
Ms Mullen.
Thank you, through the Chair. That's correct.
Thank you, Ms Mullen. Any further questions, councillors? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.3.5, proposed change of use, multiple dwelling to unhosted short-term rental accommodation, Lot 8, number 8 of 5 Clarence Street, South Perth. The purpose of this report is to consider an application for development approval for a change of use from a multiple dwelling to unhosted short-term rental accommodation on Lot 8, Unit 8, 5 Clarence Street, South Perth. The item is referred to Council as the proposed land use falls outside the delegation to officers. For the reasons outlined in the report, it is recommended that the application be approved, subject to conditions.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillor Coveney.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Same question as my last. Does the applicant have the approval of their strata council?
Ms Mullen.
Thank you, through the chair. The strata manager has indicated that the body would have no objection if approval was granted by the city.
Thank you, Ms Mullen. Councillor Choi.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've got a couple of questions on this one. So the subject site is located on the first floor of a 3-storey building, and the city's stated position is that it generally does not support such change of use proposals located in rear group dwellings. So I was just wondering what the principal differences are between this subject site being amongst other residences and not on the ground floor, and a rear situated unit.
Ms Mullen.
Thank you, through the chair. And thank you for the question. So yes, LPP 305.18 short-term accommodation does state that the city will generally not support proposals located in isolated locations such as cul-de-sac streets or in rear group dwellings. The reasoning being that a rear unit in a group dwelling has potentially less legibility for visitors who are unfamiliar with the site, and therefore may cause noise and disturbance to residents as they enter and leave. The application site is located on the first floor of a group dwelling at the front of the site, directly adjacent to Clarence Street, which increases legibility and therefore reduces disturbance to existing residents.
Thank you, Ms Mullen. Councillor Choi.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and again through the chair to Ms Mullen. So what are the possible implications if council, for whatever reason, do not endorse the officer's recommendation to approve the change of use? And what recourse do neighbouring residents who may be affected by the change of use, if it is endorsed, have in future? And I think Ms Mullen's already touched on that a little bit with the previous item.
Ms Mullen.
Thank you. So if council does not endorse the officer's recommendation, the applicant may seek a review of the decision at the State Administrative Tribunal. However, this particular property is currently registered to operate as unhosted STRA with the Department of Energy, Mines, Industry Regulation and Safety, and may continue to operate without development approval for up to 90 days within a 12-month period. And to confirm, a recommended condition of approval is that the use must be undertaken in accordance with the submitted management plan. Should residents be affected by the change of use, a complaints procedure is outlined within the management plan, together with the property manager's details.
Thank you, Ms Mullen. Councillor Coveney.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a question about these management plans. Has anyone ever in the city of South Perth had, their licence or their permission to operate a short stay taken away from them due to a complaint made due to the management plan not being fulfilled?
Ms Mullen.
Thank you, through the chair. It's not possible to cancel or remove a development approval because a person is not complying with the condition of the approval. Action would be taken, compliance action would be taken. But I'm not aware of any, it's not possible to actually remove an approval for a use once granted in that way.
Thank you, Ms Mullen. Councillor Coveney.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Has any action been taken if there's been a breach of the management plan?
Ms Mullen.
Thank you, through the chair. Yes, it has. Thank you.
Any further questions, councillors? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.3.6, RFT 5 of 2024, provision of various minor concrete works. This report considers the submission received from the advertising of tender 5 of 2024 for the provision of various minor concrete works. The report outlines the assessment process used for the evaluation of the tender received and recommends approval of the tender that provides the best value for money and level of service to the city. And I note that there is a confidential attachment for this item.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, any questions? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.4.1, listing of payments September 2024. This report presents to Council a list of accounts paid under delegated authority between 1 and 30 September 2024 for information. It also includes purchase card transactions between 1 August and 31 August 2024 in line with the new legislative requirements.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillor Choi.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'm just wondering why a Civic Heart contribution of $45,000 has been reimbursed, please.
Who should I send that to? Is that Mr Lecoq? Yes? Or Miss Mullen, my apologies.
Thank you, through the chair. So this was a contribution that was required towards landscaping. It was in effect a bond for landscaping works that were going to be undertaken around the Civic Heart area. What actually eventuated was the developer undertook those works, so the monies were reimbursed to the developer.
Thank you, Ms Mullen. Any further questions, councillors? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.4.2, monthly financial statements, September 2024. The monthly financial statements are provided in the attachments A through I, with a high level of analysis contained in the comments of the report.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, any questions? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.4.3, City of South Perth Cats Local Law 2024. This report proposes that Council, in accordance with Section 3.124 of the Local Government Act 1995, makes the City of South Perth Cats Local Law 2024. This local law will repeal the City of South Perth Cats Local Law 2016 and was presented to Council at the ordinary Council meeting held on the 25th of June 2024, at which time Council endorsed the proposed new local law and resolved to give public notice. This report considers the feedback received during this process and recommends the City of South Perth Local Cats Law 2024 be made.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, any questions on this item? Nope. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.4.4, City of South Perth Fencing Local Law 2024. This report proposes that Council, in accordance with Section 3.124 of the Local Government Act 1995, makes the City of South Perth Fencing Local Law 2024, which will establish the minimum requirements for fences within the district. This report considers the feedback received during this process and recommends the City of South Perth Fencing Local Law 2024 be made.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, any questions? No? Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.4.5, Local Government Elections, Review of WALGA Advocacy Positions. This report is to consider WALGA's request for Council to consider the current and alternative elections advocacy positions and provide a response back to WALGA for the December 2024 State Council meeting.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. I think Councillor Coveney was first there.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I submitted an amended motion on Friday afternoon. I'm just wondering when that'll be available on the hub for other councillors to see.
Ms Fry.
We can put that on the hub probably in the next day or so.
Councillor Choi.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. So just wondering, it's a procedural question. In relation to this item, if elected members have a difference of opinion, which sounds like one at least may have so far, to the officer recommendation in respect to any of the six sections outlined, would any proposed changes be treated as an alternative or an amendment? And if it is an alternative, what if there are multiple versions received from different elected members?
Mr Adams or Ms Fry? Mr Adams.
So Councillor Coveney has already submitted his. So our intention is that that would be treated as an alternate motion, and then any others that subsequently come in would be treated as amendments. If Councillor Coveney chooses to move his motion as an alternate motion at the council meeting, then any subsequent amendments to that would be treated separately as amendments. So you'd vote on the amendments separately and then come up with a final motion that would either have amendments to it or be the one that Councillor Coveney had put forward.
Thank you, Mr Adams. Any further questions, councillors? No. Next item, please, Mr Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Item 10.5.1, Policy Review. The terms of reference of the Audit, Risk and Governance Committee includes responsibility for reviewing the City's policies. A number of policies are presented for the consideration of the committee and referral to Council for adoption.
Now, councillors, just before I ask for questions, I am conscious that Councillor Navard has declared a proximity interest, so I'll just ask if anyone indicate if they do want to ask any questions. Okay, yes, we do. Councillor Navard, would you like to leave the room for the duration of the questions on this item? So I'll just give Councillor Navard a moment to leave the chamber. All right. Councillor Choi, you had a question?
Yes, I've got a couple of questions. Just in relation to, first of all, policy P687. My reading and interpretation of that policy, which is regarding development of council-owned land, which was implemented in around the early 2000s and is proposed to be revoked by council this month, is that it applies to all applications pertaining to the significant development of land for commercial purposes, which is situated on council-owned or controlled land. Is my understanding correct?
Should I send that to Ms Mullen or Ms Fryer? Or Mr Adams? Ms Mullen? No?
I would have to take that on notice, I'm sorry.
All right. Any other questions, Councillor Choi?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, my second question was, does the policy also apply to the acquisition and sale of council-owned or controlled land?
Ms Mullen, would you want to take that one on notice, or Mr Adams? Mr Bradford?
Can I just clarify, did you say acquisition and sale or acquisition?
Acquisition and or sale.
Mr Adams?
So the policy applies to the zoning of land. Is that what you're talking about? Yeah. So that's what it applies to. So where we're changing the zoning of land.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and through the chair to Director Adams. I might send those questions through, if that's okay, if I can't get responses this evening on the fly, because my understanding is it's more than just the rezoning of land. It also applies to significant development on the land. There's ors in the policy. It's not only zoning or rezoning. But I could be wrong. That's why I'm asking the questions.
Okay.
All right. Happy to send through those questions then, Councillor Choi?
I haven't yet, but I will do that after the meeting this evening, if that helps.
Sure. Okay. Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Choi.
Yes, thanks. This is in relation to policy P106, which relates to the use of city reserves and facilities.
Yes.
Yep. So the first question is, how many and what type of expressions of interest has the city received over the last 2 years for commercial and private events involving over 500 attendees on the South Perth foreshore?
Who should I send that to, folks? Mr Quigley?
Thank you for the question. We'll have to take that on notice. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Quigley. Councillor Choi?
Yes, thanks, Mr Mayor. Is the city expecting an increase in commercial and private event applications on the South Perth foreshore if the large-scale definition is expanded, as proposed, from 500 to 2,000 people in policy P106?
Mr Quigley?
The short answer is yes. Sir James Mitchell Park is the city's premier destination for events. All large-scale event applications submitted to the city seek use of Sir James Mitchell Park. One of the reasons for recommending an amendment to the large-scale events definition is to encourage optimal activation of the park, particularly for events up to 2,000 people. Currently, the provisions put unnecessary bureaucratic burden on the event organisers. So the net result is event organisers take their business elsewhere. And we have, through the city's event planning requirements, we already have the necessary risk management processes in place to manage or mitigate the risks associated with events, such as the event organisers must prepare and submit site plans, risk management plans, noise management plans, parking and traffic management plans, and associated plans.
Thank you, Mr Quigley. Councillor Choi?
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and through the Chair to Mr Quigley. So Regulation 18 of the State's Environment Protection Noise Regulations 1997 appears to allow the CEO of a local government to approve an event even when noise emissions would knowingly exceed the assigned noise levels, including for commercially run concerts and festivals on the South Perth foreshore, via the approval of a Noise Regulation 18 application. So I'm just wondering, how does the CEO of this local government propose to manage the interests of noise-affected residents and ratepayers, as well as wildlife in an environmentally sensitive area, if the large-scale definition and policy P106 is expanded from 500 to 2,000 attendees?
Mr Bradford?
I think Mr Quigley's already pretty well answered it in that we have a robust process for assessing applications for events that includes a cross-organisation committee, and we would require, as before that is considered, the range of plans that Mr Quigley's referred to, and if noise is identified, if it's a concert, then acoustic modelling is typically required as well, and that's part of the assessment process.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillor Choi?
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and through the Chair to CEO Bradford. And this is my last question. How does the City propose that affected residents and ratepayers in South Perth will be consulted with and be given the opportunity to voice their views on large-scale events scheduled to be held on the South Perth foreshore if the definition of a large-scale event is increased from 500 to 2,000 attendees, if there's no longer the opportunity for residents to find out about these events in the council forum, including via deputations or questions to council or via their councillors?
Mr Quigley?
Part of the process for approving the non-conforming noise events is a community consultation period. The city has undertaken that previously through surveys, and that has given the opportunity for residents to provide feedback on the number of large-scale events that they would see as suitable for the area. And in that case, the last time the survey was done, the results indicated that the residents would support up to 4 non-conforming noise events per 12-month period. So effectively, the city has put a cap of up to 4, a maximum of 4 non-conforming noise events.
Thank you, Mr Quigley. Mr Bradford?
And just to be clear, not all commercial events would be in that category of exceeding the noise requirements. So there could be commercial events that are not exceeding the noise requirements.
Thank you, Mr Bradford and Mr Quigley. Councillor Coveney?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. What's the current capacity of the foreshore to host events in terms of, do we have a maximum? Like, can it host 20,000 people, 30,000 people?
Mr Quigley?
If you remember the days of the fireworks, we would have over 100,000 people on the foreshore.
Thank you very much, Mr Quigley. Any further questions, councillors? No. In that case, could someone please retrieve Councillor Navard? Thank you very much. Okay. Now we're moving on to item 12, which is motions of which previous notice has been given. We've got 7 of them this evening. The first one is item 12.1, a notice of motion from Councillor Mary Choi, entitled Investigating Opportunities to Address Derelict Houses and Untidy Blocks on Canning Highway. Councillors, do we have any questions for the administration on this item this evening? No, I guess I'll just ask one then. And maybe it's to Mr Bradford, does this notice of motion do anything that couldn't be handled administratively?
The notice of motion calls me to write to the Planning Commission and Main Roads to clean up their properties. I could already do that and administratively, and to investigate future redevelopment opportunities. We could start work on that in any case. The only thing it really achieves is that rather than me writing the letter, it also would indicate that the council has asked me to write the letter.
Thank you. Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Choi, and then Councillor Navard.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Is the CEO or the anyone else in the administration aware that I did actually seek advice on this motion prior to submitting it with Director Shaw? Thank you.
Director Shaw's not here. Who should I send that to? Ms Mullen?
Thank you. I'm not aware of any approaches being made. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Navard?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My question just relates to the city's capacity to be able to recoup any costs that might be incurred if they were to do something about degraded properties.
Thank you. Ms Mullen, can I send that in your direction? Oh, no, Mr Bradford?
Can I just clarify what you're actually saying? You're saying to clean up the properties or to develop the properties?
No, clean them up.
All right. Thank you. Ms Mullen?
Thank you, through the Chair. As stated within the report, the City has the option of issuing improvement notices, however would not typically do so given the limited ability to enforce the notice on the Crown. Section 3.25 of the Local Government Act 1995 provides the ability for local government to issue a notice requiring the landowner to do anything specified in the notice in relation to untidy land in accordance with the schedule in the Act. However, the Act does not bind the Crown except where expressly stated, and as such the City cannot use these provisions for properties owned by the Crown on Canning Highway.
Thank you, Ms Mullen. Councillor Coveney?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just seek some clarity about the purpose of letter writing. I think it was said just a moment ago that technically this could just be done behind the scenes, but how is this different to the letter that, Mr Mayor, you'd asked council to send to, the CEO, which council endorsed and I fully support, to the local members about indoor sports courts? How is this a different scenario?
It's not different. We often get notices of motion that can be dealt with administratively and councillors pursue them still, and they're entitled to do that. But the reality is many of these things can be done administratively.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, any further questions? Councillor Choi?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Sorry, I know this is only for questions, but that's why I sort of asked that question before about whether anyone was aware that I did actually seek administrative advice on this before lodging my... But it doesn't seem that anyone was with Director Shaw, so unfortunately no one can kind of answer that this evening in that respect, but I just wanted to say that.
Mr Bradford?
I can answer that. I've actually had discussions with a number of councillors around those properties. Councillor Prendeville actually met with me before you put in your notice of motion, and I was going to write. The notice of motion came in, I said, oh, well, I'll hold off. But the reality is I can do it administratively.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, any further questions on this item? No. Okay. We move on to item 12.2, which is a notice of motion from Councillor Nick Coveney entitled Political Register. Councillors, any questions for the administration on this item? Councillor Choi.
Yep, I just have a few here. First of all, did the DLGSC expressly state that it does not support the need for this political interest register, as outlined in the officer's comments on page 85 of the agenda? As my recollection is that it simply inquired about it.
Who should I send that to, folks? Mr Adams?
Yeah, so I think we made available the letter that the DLGSC sent to the city regarding this matter. It's on the hub now. And they said that the city should reconsider the need for it. I'm fairly sure I can just find that. I can find that. Oh, no, I haven't got it. Do you have it, Tony? No. It was clear that they didn't support it, but they said that council should reconsider it. So, but that letter is available to elected members on the hub.
Thank you, Mr Adams. Mr Bradford?
I don't recall it exactly, but I'm pretty sure that the letter also included a reference to the fact that the department had considered the need for a register as part of the local government reforms and had decided not to pursue it. That was either in a letter or in the email that accompanied it.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillor Choi?
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and through the Chair to Director Adams and CEO Bradford. So again, just relating to the department advice that's stated in the comments on the item in respect to the register, So the advice that has been referred to in that officer comment is just in that letter that CEO Bradford's just referred to? Okay, thank you. And did the city respond to the department's inquiry about the register, as I cannot see this documented in any of the city's responding letters that I had access to the DLGSC?
Mr Adams or Mr Bradford?
I'd have to take that on notice.
Any further questions, Councillor Choi?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. The motion that was passed at the April 22 OCM was the city's suggested alternative recommendation, was it not?
I can't remember. Mr Adams, Mr Bradford? Ms Fryer? Might have to take that one on notice and check it. Councillor Choi?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. The city states in its comments at page 85 of the agenda that it supports the proposed motion to remove clause 10A of the City of South Perth Council Code of Conduct. So does that mean it also supports removal of the political interest register?
Who should I send that to? Is that Ms Fryer or Mr Adams? Mr Adams.
Yes, just to be clear that or what we're saying we're supportive of is in line with the DLGC advice. They said in their letter that it was explicitly ruled out in the current local government reforms. Prior to us, this was done, we received this advice after that previous motion had already been passed and the register had been implemented. So I guess, from a point of view, the city's point of view now, we're reflecting the advice that we were provided with by DLGSC. I don't think we have any specific view on, in terms of the political views on it, but ours is purely based on what we were given by the DLGSC and the comments they made in relation to this particular register. So that's where our support is coming from. That's the only reason that we're saying that we're supportive of it.
Thank you, Mr Adams. Councillor Choi.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and through the Chair to Director Adams. Just my last question. So the city has other public registers applicable to elected members that are also not mandated by the Local Government Act, namely the elected members' contact with developers and lobbyist register. I'm just wondering, would the city support removal of this register if a motion was so brought as well?
Mr Adams, should I send that to you?
I think if we received similar advice from DLGSC, then we might form a view that was in line with that advice. But given that we haven't formed such a view. So this was only specifically for this particular register and the change to the Code of Conduct that was made in order for this register to be to come into existence. So again, I just point to the advice from DLGSC, and that is what is behind the city's or the city officers' support for the notice of motion.
Thank you, Mr Adams. Any further questions on this item, councillors? No. Okay. That brings us to item 12.3, which is a notice of motion from Councillor Nick Coveney entitled Expression of Interest for an E-Scooter Trial. Councillors, any questions? I think Councillor Navard was first there.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I have two questions here. What would be the likely financial impact of establishing geo-fenced zones for the management of e-scooters during an e-scooter trial?
Big question. Mr Bradford?
So the establishment of an EOI to do an e-scooter trial would come at some staff cost, but in terms of specifically around geofencing, I note that both in the City of Vincent and the City of Perth, the operators have established and maintained geofence locations that exclude scooters from certain areas, and that it could be, for example, malls, when the City of Perth trial went live first, they were excluded from state government Crown land. Then that got opened up. They can impose speed restrictions in certain areas, and that doesn't come at any cost to the local government.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillor Navard?
Is the city aware of any e-scooter companies that actually supply bells or horns as part of the package.
Who should I send that one to?
I'm not. I'd have to take that on notice. I actually think they do have a bell on them, but I can't be certain. I'll take that on notice.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillor Choi, I saw your hand go up.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. So I recall a councillor workshop was held sometime in mid-22 on e-scooters, and that a shared user agreement, including a trial, was still being investigated. So I'm just wondering what has transpired over these past 2 years since that workshop. I was looking at the city's comments in regards to this motion, just trying to fill in the blanks.
So the inner city group, which is the 5 local governments, initially discussed doing a joint EOI for a trial. The City of Perth had some advice that said that we weren't able to do that as a group of 5 at the time, and so the City of Perth went ahead with the trial, and they now, I think their 2-year trial's due to expire in March, and that was followed soon thereafter by Vincent, who did an expression of interest, and the Vincent expression of interest effectively said that we want to trial this for a period of a year. And anyone who wants to offer their service to us must be compatible with the City of Perth. So it effectively constrained it to those two. And so we've been kind of watching and see how they go. Those trials have both provided reports to their council in terms of how they've been functioning and how they've been working. We have been actively discussing with the Victoria Park to proceed to an EOI, because my observation is that the best outcome for e-scooters in the inner city area is if you can ride from South Perth to the city, and to do that, ideally, you've got to go across a little bit of Vic Park, so it would be better to have all of those 3 on a compatible system. And so those discussions have been continuing and making some progress. I do note that the City of Vincent and the City of Perth are all going to have to go back to the market at some point in the very near future. My view of this is that, for optimal optimal use of scooters, you want to be able to travel as far across the inner city area rather than having to say at the border between Vic Park and South Perth, I have to get off one brand of scooter and get on another one, would be a nonsense. And so it's better to have us all on the same provisions. I think that lends itself to going out together as a 5 local governments for a single scheme, and I believe that is something that the other local governments are open to, and that the advice previously received may not be applicable. So that's been taking a bit of time.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillor Choi.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and through the Chair to CEO Bradford. So you may have already kind of answered this question. So what has the tone from the Perth Inner City Group been in respect to their local government e-scooter trials, and what have been their biggest challenges? Have they shared anything yet with you?
Mr Bradford.
We've discussed it pretty regularly, and we have had a couple of reports shared with us. Broadly, the trials have been successful. There have been a few accidents and incidents. There is evidence that the use of e-scooters reduces car trips, and that's documented. And the main concerns raised in a number of areas would be the perception of the scooters as litter, i.e. that they take up room on where they're parked. But my observation and discussions around how the providers are managing the scooters is that they've been pretty compliant in terms of picking them up, relocating them to the pick-up and drop-off stations, and that they have been managed quite well. But when we get closer to where we're at with this, then my intention would be to have a workshop with councillors where we'd share some of that more detail that we've got from other local governments.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillor Choi.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and through the Chair again to CEO Bradford. So I'm just wondering, if the city has had the opportunity to take up an e-scooter trial before now and before this motion, why hasn't it done so? Is that because it's still, as you were saying, CEO Bradford, that you're still in discussions, have been in discussions with the other local governments?
Mr Bradford.
Sorry, was the question, why haven't we done it? So I go back to, in order for it to be effective, we need to have one set of arrangements across all of the local governments. My preference is to do an expression of interest with more than one local government, and so there's been just trying to line all of those up has been the challenge, but I think we're much closer to it now.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillor Choi.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. And again, through the Chair to Sia Bradford. I understand under the regulations that e-scooters would be permitted on all shared pathways and bike paths in South Perth. And if this is still the case, what are the potential ramifications of this for pedestrian and cyclists who also use these paths along the foreshore?
Councillor Choi, the notice of motion is essentially about whether we go ahead with going it alone with an expression of interest or whether or not we potentially wait and go out with other local governments. I'm just not clear how that question is relevant to the item before us. Are you able to explain that one?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It's relevant because I have to decide as a decision maker whether I agree to a trial, supporting a trial of e-scooters, and I'm just asking some general questions around the concerns that I've had expressed to me by community members.
All right, I'll allow it. Mr Bradford or Ms Amprimo?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. So if I understand the question correctly, there are two answers to the question you're asking about the whether scooters can go on those facilities. That is allowed under law as to whether people can go on those or not. We can't change that, but what we can do is where we have a scheme for people to hire them, we can put restrictions on where they would go. But if they can't go on the shared use path, on the cycle path, if we restrict them from going there, there doesn't seem a great deal of point of having the scheme. Thank you, Ms Amprimo.
Councillor Choi, another question?
Yes, thanks, Mr Mayor, and through the Chair to Director Amprimo. So if there is a collaboration between the City of South Perth, as I've heard, the City doesn't seem to want to go it alone, and that's understandable, with another local government, and if that local government doesn't agree to paying the extra cost for geofencing or speed limiting capabilities on the scooters, like what would happen if one local government agrees to those sort of measures being implemented and paying the extra cost and another one doesn't, based on their own needs?
To be clear, there's no additional costs. And based on the experience of the City of Perth and City of Vincent, the arrangements in terms of restrictions in speed and locations and drop-off zones as developed in collaboration between the provider and the local government. And the providers actually bring a lot of expertise into knowing how to manage the scooters, and so that works. My observation is I believe that's worked well. And again, I go back to the best outcome across the inner city group is if we have common arrangements across all of them. And so at the moment, City of Perth, you can use a scooter in the City of Perth and seamlessly go into City of Vincent and return and vice versa, and they're all managed in exactly the same way.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillor Choi?
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and through the Chair to Sia Bradford. And my last question. So how long will the trial likely be? Has there been any thoughts to that yet, or is that still something to be decided at another date?
Mr Bradford?
Haven't considered it. I think the City of Perth was a 2-year trial. I think the City of Vincent was a 1-year trial.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillors, Councillor D'Souza?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In terms of the scope of this item, we have a potential EOI that it potentially leads to a contract. Is it anticipated to cover the entire boundaries of the City of South Perth or just the South Perth foreshore? How does the City envision this trial to roll out?
Ms Amprimo?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. So what we would be looking for is the expressions of interest to tell us where they believe it would be viable to put them in place. We could explicitly exclude some areas if that's what we wished, but it's likely the operator is going to have the best idea of where it's going to be financially viable, and if it's not financially viable for them, they're not going to want to put them in that place because we wouldn't be seeking to subsidise the trial.
Thank you, Ms Amprimo. Councillor D'Souza?
Thanks, Mayor. And so if Council decides to sort of, cordon off certain areas, would that be better done in an EOI process or through geofencing and discussions with potential parties who are interested?
Ms Amprimo?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. So it might help elected members if I outline how I see the process might proceed with or without the notice of motion. We would work with the other local governments as we're currently doing and try to align to their process. we would come back to council for agreement in principle to proceed with other local governments if we got to a point where we believed that was workable. Because obviously we wouldn't want to go to the market with other local governments if we didn't have council's support to proceed in that way. And that would be an opportunity for us to discuss any particular restrictions that council felt was necessary.
Thank you, Ms Ampremo. Councillors, any further questions on this item? No. All right. The next item is item 12.4, which is a notice of motion from Councillor Bronwyn Moore entitled Men's Street Jetty South Perth Seaplanes. Councillors, any questions on this item? Councillor Choi.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Firstly, who originally decided on the current Queen Street jetty location for the South Perth Seaplanes? Because I do have some sort of recollection that the state government was involved.
Who should I send that to, folks?
We'll have to take it on notice. I assumed that it was a joint decision because there was obviously the state government and the city involved. But yeah, we'll take that on notice and get the exact answer for you.
All right. Councillor Choi.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and through the Chair to Director Adams. Have the seaplane operators formally sought the city's support to relocate from their current location at the Queen Street Jetty nearer to the Men's Street Jetty?
Ms Mullen, should I send that? No? Ms Ampremo? Or Mr Adams? Someone?
So in the discussions with us, they did indicate that they were looking at different locations from which to operate. I'm not sure if we've received any formal correspondence from them saying that that's what they want to do, but I do know that Director Shaw had dealt with them probably a week or two ago, so we can find that information and make sure that's available.
I suppose I'll just ask a follow-up question on Councillor Choi's question there. I've read the officer report. My understanding is the city administration, at least, has to remain impartial since they'll be consulted by the decision maker, which is the state government. Is that correct? I assume that the city administration, at least, can't give support to something like this. I don't know who I should be directing that to in Director Shaw's absence. Ms Mullen?
Thank you to the Chair. It would be advantageous to remain impartial because obviously the city would be a consultee in relation to any development application.
All right, thank you. I guess, Mr Bradford?
I might just clarify, there was an email where I think it was sent to one or more elected members, certainly the Mayor got it, where they were talking about needing to submit a development application and the support, I think they were using the word support, but what they were really referring to is that development application, because it's in the Swan Canning catchment area, actually requires the consent of the landowner, and in that case, that land where the jetty would abut the land is under the care and maintenance of the city, and we would have to give that our consent for the DA to be submitted, and we advised that we would do that. So that's not, to be really clear, that is not supporting the application. We're consenting that the application be submitted, and that's all we're doing.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillor Coveney?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just to clarify, on my reading of this motion, it requests the CEO to write that it's the council supports, not the administration supports. Is that correct?
Mr Adams?
Yes, that's correct.
Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Choi.
Yes, and this may have to be taken on notice. What has the city expended thus far towards ensuring that the seaplanes can operate from their current location at the Queen Street Jetty? And would there be any cost to be borne by the ratepayers for them to relocate to a new jetty closer to Men's Street if it was so approved?
Mr Adams, should I send that your way?
Sorry, can you just repeat the question?
Yes, no problem. What has the city expended thus far towards ensuring that the seaplanes can operate from their current location at the Queen Street Jetty, taking into account that I understand there were upgrades or some repairs and maintenance done, I think included in the last or current financial year's budget? And would there also be any costs to be borne by out of the municipal funds for them to relocate to a new jetty closer to the Men's Street jetty?
Mr Adams?
So my understanding is, and Director Ampremo may be able to add to this, but my understanding is that we spent approximately somewhere between $80,000 and $90,000 on upgrades to the Queen Street jetty in the past, I think, 18 months. And that was primarily so that they could continue to operate out of there. In terms of what costs could possibly be incurred by the city in their relocation, I guess that's as yet to be quantified because there's no real detail on what would be required. So that's something that I guess would have to be worked out later on in the process. But you know, I imagine that there would be some cost, but I'm not sure exactly what that would be.
Thank you. I'll ask a question. If I'm reading the notice of motion right, it seems to be calling upon council to provide in-principle support for a request that I understand requires a development application to be submitted. Have any elected members discussed the intent of this notice of motion with the City Administration prior to the lodgement of this notice of motion? I don't know if that's to Ms Mullen or Mr Adams. Ms Mullen?
Thank you, through the chair. I'm not aware of any discussions taking place.
All right, thank you. Councillor Choi, I think I saw your hand go up there.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Is there a risk that the proposed relocation could hamper the state's efforts to increase their ferry services, and is the state likely to approve such a relocation in that instance?
Mr Bradford? Or...
We have no idea. There's not even a development application yet.
Okay. Councillor Choi?
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and through the chair to CEO Bradford. I kind of answered that question myself as I was asking it, given the other discussion we've just had. So are there any implications with this motion? Is there anything else that we should be considering from the city's point of view?
Ms Mullen, shall I send that to you?
Thank you, through the chair. Not at this stage. I think it's been adequately addressed within the officer's response to the notice of motion.
Thank you, Ms Mullen. And I guess my final question, Mr Bradford, did you just say that there hasn't been a development application submitted yet? Ms Mullen?
Thank you, through the chair. That's correct. There hasn't been a development application submitted to date.
Oh, thank you. Any further questions on this item, councillors? No? Okay. We now move on to item 12.5, a notice of motion from Councillor Bronwyn Moore entitled Payment in lieu of Parking Plan. Councillors, any questions on this item? Councillor Choi.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Just if there's any potential implications that councillors should be turning their mind to in regards to this. I know there is a suggested officer recommendation as well.
Ms Mullen?
Thank you, through the chair. Again, only the matters that have been raised by the officer in response to the notice of motion in the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Mullen. I might ask a couple of questions. I have read the report. Clause 2 of Councillor Waugh's motion calls for council to, open quote, says acknowledges the deficiency in the current payment in lieu of parking plan, close quote. Is our current payment in lieu of parking plan deficient?
Thank you, through the chair. The city's current payment in lieu of parking plan has been prepared consistent with the manner and form approved by the Western Australian Planning Commission under the provisions of clause 77J brackets 3 of the Planning and Development brackets Local Planning Schemes close brackets Regulations 2015. The plan has been prepared and adopted by Council in the manner and form approved by the WAPC and is therefore compliant with the regulations and is not deficient.
Thank you. I'll just make sure that I've understood the intent of Councillor Waugh's motion correctly. If I understand it correctly, it's seeking to quarantine monies received through the payment in lieu of parking plan to specific, I don't know how to describe them, but geographic localities, shall we say. Number one, is that understanding correct? And number two, doesn't council already control where the relevant funds are spent through the annual budget process?
Thank you, through the chair. Yes, that's my same understanding of the intent, to ensure that any monies received in lieu of parking on site are spent within the areas or precincts in which they are received, so as to address the shortfall and address location-specific needs as identified in the notice of motion. And with regard to the quarantining of money, again, that's correct. Any expenditure associated with monies received as part of the payment in lieu of parking plan would be considered as part of the annual budget process.
All right, thank you. So I guess that raises the obvious follow-on question, which is, given that council already has control of where those relevant monies are going to be spent, why would it be a bad thing for council to retain the flexibility it currently has? Where would be the harm in that? Mr. Adams?
I don't think there's any harm in it. I think the issue probably is that if it relates to a specific area, we may not get enough funds in any specific area to do anything substantial. So the risk is that we end up with a number of small pots of money that don't get spent and required to be returned at the expiry of the plan. So I guess that would probably be the risk that might become apparent if we went down that path. My view would be that the way that it's set up now in terms of the money's going into one pot, council still retains the ability to spend that wherever council so decides, and that's all done through the budget process normally.
Thank you. You've actually anticipated my next question. I did see at page 99 of the officer report that the city does have an obligation to refund any monies collected but not spent by the time the plan expires. And I did wonder whether there was a danger of slicing up the district into little sub-localities and quarantining collected monies to those little sub-localities, but you've answered that question. Are there any other risks associated with going down this path?
I'm not sure that I'm the best person to ask, but none that come to mind. I think that's probably the biggest one that we've just talked about.
All right, thank you. Ms Mullen, I guess my next question is to you. The paragraph 3 of the notice of motion talks about a report and a plan that the CEO would present to council by the December 2024 ordinary council meeting. Number one, is that enough time? And number two, how much is that likely to cost?
Thank you to the chair. So the city is currently progressing a review of the parking in the district following budget allocation in 2024-25 budget. Other than that, the report and plan would take officer time. This would not be particularly significant as this approach has previously been considered when the current plan was formulated. It should be noted, however, that review of the parking would not be concluded by that time, so it would be, more time would be required.
All right, thank you. And my final question is, have any elected members discussed the intent of this notice of motion with the city administration before this notice of motion was lodged?
Thank you to the chair. To best of my knowledge, there have been no discussions prior to the notice of motion being submitted.
All right, thank you. Councillor Coveney?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I think it was just established that there may be a potential risk in giving back money if it's not spent and there being lots of small pots hanging about. Is that not remedied by simply an amendment to the motion that there be some kind of catch-all provision that the starting point is you spend it in the area, but council ultimately has discretion as to where it's spent?
Ms Mullen or Mr Adams? Ms Mullen?
Thank you to the chair. So the regulation of manner and form enables plans to cover an entire local planning scheme area, one specific area or multiple individual areas. I think it would be imprecise to not settle on one of those options within the plan. So whilst it may be financially possible, I don't think it would be good governance to include that option within the plan.
Thank you, Ms Mullen. Councillors, any further questions on this item? No. Okay. We're moving on to item 12.6, notice of motion from Councillor Bronwyn-Moore entitled Mayoral Reporting. Councillors, any questions on this item? Councillor Choi.
Yes, thanks, Mr Mayor. I'm just looking at the notice of motion and the suggested officer recommendation. and the comments there. I'm just trying to work out why a deputy mayor would provide a report when really they're just stepping in for the mayor. So it would still be a mayoral report. They don't do anything different, do they, except for filling in? I might be wrong.
Mr Adams?
So the point, I guess, was that the deputy mayor has statutory functions that are undertaken on behalf of the mayor, and therefore, if the mayor's reporting for completeness of all the mayoral duties undertaken, then the deputy mayor should, I guess, report those instances where they have undertaken mayoral duties as part of their role as deputy mayor.
Thank you, Mr Adams. Any further questions, councillors? I've got a few, largely because the intent of this motion is to change the reporting that I'm subject to. So I guess my first question will be to Mr Adams. Councillor Waugh has asserted in her reasons that, open quote, every local government is expected to ensure that the mayor reports regularly to council regarding those persons he/she has met, his/her interactions with members of the community relevant to council, his/her engagements with senior staff members, and any other matters he/she has been dealing with in between council meetings. Is that true?
My interpretation of that is that they're reporting to council in a formal process. Of the 30 metropolitan local governments that we reviewed, 6 had some sort of formal reporting by the mayor. The others, I may have reporting, but it's certainly not formal through the council meeting.
Thank you. My next question is for Ms Fry. Does any other local government have a policy of the kind that Councillor Waugh is proposing?
We're not aware of any policies, and we also discussed it with Wellga as well, and they're not aware of any policies.
Thank you. My third question is to Mr Adams. Does any other local government require their mayor or president to comply with the kind of regime that Councillor Waugh is proposing?
Not that we're aware of.
Okay, thank you. My next question is to Mr Bradford. Have any elected members discussed the intent of this notice of motion with the City Administration before the notice of motion was lodged?
Not that I'm aware of.
Thank you. And final question is to Mr Adams. If Council decides that this notice of motion is appropriate and that I should be subject to this unprecedented set of new rules that the Deputy Mayor is advocating, is there any reason why the Deputy Mayor should not be subject to the very self-same regime, or for that matter, all elected members?
So obviously there's part of the notice of motion that relates specifically to the role of the mayor. However, there's other parts of the motion that apply more to the functions of an elected member in general, and it would be, I guess, somewhat inequitable to apply them only to one elected member, being the mayor. Again, I'd reiterate that the extent that the policy resulting from this motion would go to in terms of reporting, in our view, necessitates careful consideration to ensure that there's clarity in what's required, particularly around the definitions of what's required to be reported and what's not. And the reason for that is that we're putting in place a policy, and there needs to be some certainty around those things to prevent unintended breaches, remembering that breaches of policy for councillors, particularly when those policies apply specifically to the councillors themselves, can result in breaches of the code of conduct claims and the subsequent investigations that need to be undertaken with regard to that. So I would just urge some, I guess, caution around if we're going forward with a policy, that we would need to be certain around those things that fall into those definitions, and make sure that we're clear about what's excluded and what's included.
Thank you, Mr Adams. Councillor Coveney.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a point of order. Is it appropriate for you to be part of these discussions if the motion's in effect about the mayoral position?
Well, I've declared an impartiality interest, Councillor Coveney. Are you suggesting it's a financial or a proximity interest?
No, I'm not.
Then,
Okay, so your answer is no.
well, I'm asking you. I declared an impartiality interest,
Okay, well,
but
if
you've still
it's
raised the issue.
appropriate- No, okay, well, it sounds like you don't have an issue with it.
All right, very good.
Okay, another question is in relation to the, I think, Director Adams, you were saying that why shouldn't old elected members be subject to the same provisions? Isn't the role and the remuneration of elected members and the mayor like quite different?
Sorry, Councillor Coveney, I'll ask you for the relevance of that question.
The relevance of the question is the recommendation or one of the comments made by the administration themselves is about that very same point. So I'd say it's self-evident.
I still don't understand, but Mr Adams, do you understand what Councillor Coveney is asking?
Yes, I do. So I think, as I said, there's certain parts of this that relate solely to the function of the mayor, and I think we have made a position clear on that, in that I don't see any problem with the mayor reporting on those specific things that are to do with the mayor. But when you get into the rest of the notice of motion, where we're talking about details of interactions with senior employees, that relates specifically to, or that relates more generally to the role of a councillor, because all councillors have those similar interactions, and particularly around things that they may vote on. So I think that's outside of specifically the role of the mayor. Similarly, where there's meetings or discussions with politicians, lobbyists, groups, or people seeking to influence the outcome of any decision to be taken by council, that could equally apply to councillors. It's more, it's not just the mayor that would be having interactions with those groups, and indeed we have some other registers that already cover some of that stuff for all elected members. So I guess the view that we've taken is that yes, there are some things that it could be beneficial for the mayor to be reporting on, but there's some other things that if you were applying to the mayor, then for the same reasons, you would probably want to apply them to all elected members, particularly given that the mayor only has one vote in any particular matter on council. Sometimes, obviously, may have a casting vote, but all councillors have a vote. So if we're talking about those other things, then I think just to single out one elected member probably could be seen as a little bit inequitable.
Thank you, Mr Adams. Councillor Choi.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I think we were reminded by one of the deputies this evening that one of the key local government reform themes has been to increase transparency and accountability. I'm just wondering, does the city believe that this type of policy, regardless of which way you go with the notice of motion recommendation or the suggested officer recommendation, does it believe that this policy achieves that kind of increased transparency and accountability for this local government?
Mr Adams.
I'm not sure I've really formed a view on that. I guess, if we're talking about openness and transparency, then being open and transparent should apply to all elected members. I guess that's all I'll say. It's not, if there are, again, I'll go back to, there are specific things that the mayor does that other elected members don't, and I think it's fair enough that there's a specific report on that from the mayor. But in terms of some of the other things, I think they equally apply to other elected members as well.
Thank you, Mr Adams. Any further questions, councillors? No. Okay. That brings us on to item 12.7, notice of motion. Councillor Nick Coveney, expression of interest for floating venue trial at Coode Street Jetty. Councillors, any questions? Councillor Choi.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Can the City offer any updates on the Boatshed Cafe extension and New Miller's Pool Cafe development approvals, please? And why it seems to be taking so long for them to commence?
Ms Mullen.
Thank you, through the chair. So the application for the extension to the boat shed is currently with the city. That was submitted last week. So that's currently under assessment, and discussions have been taking place in regards to the other development application.
Thank you, Ms Mullen. Councillor Choi.
Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Oh, sorry, Mr Bradford.
I was just going to add, in terms of timeframe, I think we've said previously the biggest consumption of delays was the change of Department of Land seeking to impose rent on for both sites in terms of Miller's Pool when the leased area was excised. So that took a lot of negotiations to get the rent down to the city to something that was acceptable, because when council approved that process, no rent was anticipated. So that took a long time, and then it's taken a fair bit of time to negotiate a lease with the DPLH and then the subsequent sublease. And a similar arrangement applied to the boat shed because they had to extend their lease area. So that's consumed most of that time.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillor Choi.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and through the chair to Ms Mellon and CEO Bradford. So I'm just trying to understand, the word temporary is in there under paragraph 1. I'm just wondering how it can be temporary if it's more than if it's on a long-term ongoing lease. Is that considered temporary? Does it matter?
Mr Bradford.
I think, certainly my observation, things like there's the raft on the other side of the city, and similar vessels, they move, and so they can move from one location to another depending on what the approvals arrangement they have in place. So I think they can be temporary.
Councillor Choi.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. And just mentioning the barge, I think the raft or whatever, I don't know what it's called. I'm not even sure if it's still there. I think if there is one, but it's on the other side, is it? Elizabeth Quayside, yeah. I have some recollections in the past that at one stage it was on the South Perth foreshore side, or it went between, I can't remember, it was a few years ago now, but there were quite a number of complaints about that because I think it was known to be a bit of a party boat. So with this type of, I'm just wondering, would the city be looking for EOIs for like more of a restaurant dining type facility, or would it be kind of like open slather and could include like party boats?
Mr Bradford, should I send that?
I think the EOI calls for temporary activation, but it doesn't specify it. So that would be part of the assessment process to identify something that was suitable for the area.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillor Choi.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. My last question. Is the city aware of recent media reports suggesting South Perth is one of the top suburbs where businesses are not faring as well under the current cost of living pressures, with a prediction of record and rapid rises in business value rates in 2025? And if this is indeed the case, how can the council endorsing further venue operator leases in the same area that other DAs are still pending, as I've just asked about, alongside other hospitality businesses and bricks and mortar businesses? I'm just wondering, is it too much pressure? Does the city think it could be too much pressure on existing new businesses trying to come in and existing businesses given the current economic climate and these reports?
I'm not sure that's the job of local government, but Mr Adams?
So I think some of those issues would be borne out through the consultation that would be required to do. So obviously with the number of government departments that we would have to deal with, they would all have some consultation requirements, and we would indeed have our own. And that would be the opportunity for some of those businesses, if they did believe that they were going to be affected, to make that known so that council could take that into consideration when making a final decision.
Councillor Navard.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. What costs would the city likely encounter in developing an expression of interest for a proposed trial of a floating venue in terms of a consultation process with the community, applications and approval processes to the relevant state entities, and what might be an estimated time frame for this process to conclude?
Mr Adams.
So we currently don't know what the cost would be or the time involved in dealing with some of the issues that would be required to be dealt with in terms of making this happen. In terms of developing an EOI, we're not even sure if we would be the lead agency in doing that. So we'd need to do the consultation with the other state government agencies around how that process would work and who would do what in that process. And in doing that, we'd get a better feel for what our resource implications were. But until that happens, I'm not sure that we can give you any specific answer on that.
Councillor, thank you, Councillor Navard and Mr Adams. Councillor Choi, another question?
Yes, thanks, Mr Mayor. Councillor Navard just made me think of another question that I forgot to write down. Is there any crossover or impact with this proposal and the Coode Street Node 2 plans?
Mr Adams?
So again, I think our initial feedback from DBCA was that they would like to look at things such as this in the context of the overall development of Node 2. And so, they would not say no immediately or not say yes immediately, but would want to see what the Node 2 plans look like and what, and then have the whole context for them to be able to provide a proper assessment of it.
Thank you, Mr Adams. Councillors, any further questions? All right, I might ask a couple. So Councillor Choi alluded to this. The notice of motion does refer to the alfresco extensions being sought by the Boatshed Restaurant. And of course, the Boatshed Restaurant is located very close to Coode Street Jetty. Could this proposal impact on those extensions? I guess that's to Mr Bradford.
I would expect that the owner, the operator of the boat should have an interest in this. Yet to see that. So they'll see this, I guess, as it's been published. And you would expect that another venue down there could potentially have an impact on the existing venues. And I think that's something to be contemplated by the city and the multiple government agencies that we'd have to discuss with.
All right, thank you. My next question is the notice of motion and tonight's questions have made reference to the South Perth Foreshore and Strategy Management Plan. Did the South Perth Foreshore Strategy and Management Plan mention or consider the kind of floating food and beverage venue contemplated by this motion, either at Node 2 or anywhere else?
I've recently reread the Foreshore Management Plan. I don't believe it contemplated anything in the river part because it was focused on the area that the city has the care and control of, which is the land side of it. I do know that Node 2 the outcomes of the consultation did talk about additional food and beverage options. That was there. I'm not sure whether that was for other nodes, but I don't recall anything about really dealing with what occurred on the riverside because I don't think that was the focus of the plan. It was to deal with the land side, which is under the care and maintenance of the city.
All right, thank you. My next question is at page 110. The officer report notes that, open quote, significant community consultation has been held with the community regarding South Perth Foreshore Node 2 developments, end quote. Has that community consultation revealed any demand for the kind of floating food and beverage venue contemplated by this motion? And I guess that's to Ms Mullen.
Thank you to the Chair. I'm not aware of any direct requests or representation that's specifically specified this type of development.
All right, thank you. And I guess I should be clear that this question isn't specific to this item, but I might as well ask it now. We've got 7 councillor notices of motion on tonight's agenda, which I think might be a new record for this council. How much staff time and internal capacity is being spent on councillor-led notices of motion? Is there an opportunity cost to all of this? And I guess I'll direct that one to Mr Adams.
So I would answer yes, there is an opportunity cost. There's obviously time taken in researching various elements of the notices of motion, and then a fair bit of time spent on some of the reports. Some reports are quite simple, others require a fair bit more work. Yes, there is a significant amount of staff time taken to respond to these notices of motion. So I guess that's probably, we haven't sat down and quantified how long it takes for each one or put that in dollar terms, but yes, there is a significant amount of time and effort put into responding to notices of motion.
All right, thank you. Councillor Coveney.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It was a key recommendation of the Coode Street Outcomes Report not to have more temporary food and beverage options.
Ms Mullen or Mr Bradford?
Yeah, temporary food and beverage options, yes, but I don't think it went as far as saying floating.
Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Coveney and then Councillor Cridland.
I've got 2 questions. Firstly, in relation to the boat shed al fresco, that's not proposed to be on water, is it? It's proposed to be on land, if it goes ahead at all. The boat shed al fresco...
Could you repeat that one, please?
The boat shed al fresco application, which doesn't appear to have been pursued by the owner yet, that's for an al fresco area on land, it's not on water.
Mr Bradford?
It has been pursued because they've resubmitted a DA. And yes, it is on land.
Thank you, that's what I thought. And in relation to the impact on existing users, could it not potentially be positive to the existing user because you bring more traffic to people that may otherwise not see or know about the venue?
Who should I direct that to, folks? Mr Adams?
Yeah, so I guess that is a possibility, something that I guess we'll find out through consultation as to whether the particular businesses down there think that's the case or not. But yeah, it's certainly a possibility that it could lead to further activation, more people going down there, therefore more business for everybody. I know that's happened in particular nodes where particular developments have taken place. So it's not just about the competition, it can be about attracting more people there.
Thank you, Mr Adams. Councillor Coveney?
Last question, is one of the CEO's KPIs for this financial year not activation of the foreshore?
Is that confidential or? Okay.
It's public, but it's
right.
But it's activation, considering a whole range of things. Yes.
All right. Thank you, Mr Bradford. Councillor Cridland, I saw your hand go up there.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My question relates to the tenor of some of the questions that have been asked in respect of this item and some of the responses that have come. And those questions have related to whether or not the city would consider impact on existing businesses by such a proposal as this one. So my question is to the CEO, is whether or not the city would actually consider as a relevant matter the whether or not existing businesses were made subject to commercial competition, or whether or not the city would instead seek to stop competition and support or subsidise local businesses and avoid commercial competition.
Mr Bradford?
I might actually get Ms Mullen to answer from a planning perspective, because I think the planning answer will be pretty clear. From a Node 2 perspective, we would see it's pretty clear that the no two consultation outcomes seek to have additional temporary food and beverage outlets, and we would consider those, yes. But I'll...
Ms Mullen?
Thank you to the Chair. From a development assessment point of view, it wouldn't be a material consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Mullen. Any further questions, councillors? No. Okay. All right, that brings us to item 15, which is meeting closed to the public. This is ordinarily where we would close the meeting to the public if there was any reason for us to do so, but there's not, so we won't. And that brings us to item 16, which is closure. So before I close tonight's meeting, thank you all for your attendance and participation. I declare the meeting closed at 4 minutes past 8 p.m. Thank you all and good night.